What is going on, everybody? Today we're doing another book review. We're going to be reviewing Rising Strong by Brené Brown. Brené Brown is a professor and author of actually 5 New York Times best-selling books. One of the more recent ones here is Rising Strong. She has been researching vulnerability, empathy, courage, and shame, and the seemingly weird connection between those 4 emotions. And so in her book, Rising Strong, she explores the process of rising from failure. So this is set up not as a sequel, but as a response to one of her first really popular books, Daring Greatly. So in Daring Greatly, she uses the Theodore Roosevelt quote of the man in the arena. And, she talks about it's not the critic who counts. And she talks about getting in the arena and daring greatly and how you have to be vulnerable to display that courage. And she talks about how you will be knocked down, you will fail. It's an if, it's a will happen. And when that does happen, she then writes Rising Strong to talk about the meteoric rise out of that failure, how it's tough, it's hard, and but how that's how you grow and change. We all know the quote, oh, you learn more from failures than successes. This book is all about that, and it's how about you grow emotionally, physically, spiritually, and as a person or your business or whatever it is grows through that process of the Rising Strong process. So the Rising Strong process has 3 steps. The first steps is you notice and you investigate your emotions. So you get knocked down and you feel emotions. They might be shame, they might be guilt, they might be anger, they might be fear, whatever they are, you investigate them, you think about them. Most people don't think about their emotions. They either push them down or they let them take over. Now, Brené says you feel it, you feel the emotion, and you try to understand it. Then you're going to rumble, what she calls rumble with your stories, which is basically you take a journal, a pen, and you write it down. You write down all the crappy stuff you're feeling. She said your rumble, it should be real, it should be tough, and she said nobody should ever read it, because if they do read it, they're going to think you're a psychopath. Or murder, evil. It should be just the worst things you feel. So if someone hurts you, you can write down this person's a piece of shit, they blah, 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 they blah, blah, blah. Go all in the rumble. And then finally, you look at your rumble, and this takes time, this whole process takes time, but you finally, 3rd step, you look at the rumble and you figure out what the bullshit is. Because you're not evil, you're not a terrible person. These people probably weren't just viciously out to get you, whatever the situation was. You find the bullshit, and she calls it the delta. So in math, let's say you have x at this point, and then right now and in the future, x is at this point. This change, this distance here is the delta x, the change. And that change, the change between the bullshit and reality, that's where the growth happens. And moving your story from bullshit to the reality, it's tough, it's hard. It requires you to change your beliefs, and it requires you to change as a person. But that change, that is where the growth happens in the Rising Strong process. She illustrates the process really well through the story, a story of when she was speaking. So if you want to have Brené come and speak at your conference, I think this was 2018, it'll cost you $125,000. So she's big time, 5 New York best-selling books. And this was a little while ago, but she was still, a big popular speaker. And this place that was run by some friends of hers from before, before she'd gotten big, asked her to come in and speak. And they wanted her to do it for free. And in the email, they basically said, oh, we hope you're not too big for us, not too important for us. And this kind of hit one of her shame triggers, because growing up in Texas, even though she has all these credentials and stuff, she's always got this fear of, oh, who do you think you are type of thing. And so trying to people please, basically, she said, okay, I can do it. She got there. Again, they have rooms set up for all the speakers already, and this is a smaller town. And they go, hey, you're going to have a roommate. All the speakers have roommates. I hope that's going to be okay with you. You don't need any special accommodations. And again, trying to people please, she said, no, that's fine. And so she ended up rooming with this person who was just terrible. The lady smoked in the room when there was no smoking. She got on Brené's nerves. She was the worst to Brené. The lady is what Brené defined or called a sewer rat, someone who just breaks the rules. And not only did she break the rules, but she made fun of people who followed the rules. And this is like one of Brené's least favorite type of people. So after she spoke at the conference, she took a plane flight back to Texas, where she lived, And she realized, she was waiting in line and catching the plane, she was just judging people viciously. And she didn't really understand why, but she felt so self-righteous and so just frustrated with all the people around her. She got back and she went to talk to her therapist. And she talked to the therapist, she told her about this terrible person. And the therapist kind of brought up the idea of, what if this person is doing their best? Were they out to get you? And Brené actually got pissed at her therapist, didn't go to see her therapist for months because she felt that her therapist was taking the other person's side. So as I mentioned, Brené is a professor, and a lot of her research is qualitative type research, where she'll actually survey people and ask them questions, but then actually get the stories, the reasons. So she might have 100 data points or 10 data points in her, study, but it's all backed up with stories and with the whys. And so she started asking people, do you think people in general are doing their best? This is the question. And she said that the answers are either yes, and then people would kind of explain it. Like they almost felt bad for saying yes, like they had to explain it. And they would often explain it with stories of their own failure, but of how they were still trying their best and how they still loved themselves and became better for the process. On the other hand, the people who said no they were just like, no, of course not, people suck. And those are basically the only two types of answers she got. Either hell no or yes, and then explaining it. And so finally she asked her husband, and her husband is a pediatrician, and it's funny because, Brené is the person who researches all these things, but her husband seems to, of course he's not perfect, but he seems to have a lot of this stuff down. At least that's how Brené presents him in her books. And so she asks him, she goes, hey, do you think that people generally are doing their best? And she said it took him 10 minutes before he gave her an answer. And he finally answered with, I don't really know, but it's a lot better for me personally and for my growth, for my mental health, for me, if I believe that they are. Because if I believe that someone is doing their best, then I'm forced to treat them like another human being. I'm forced to treat them the best way that I can. And for me as a person, that's the best way. And it forces me to look at a situation and say, all right, this person's doing their best. What can I do to help them do better? Or what can I do to help the situation? But then you also have to have, he also felt that you had to have that same opinion of yourself, that you yourself are doing the best. And not in a, woe is me, I'm doing the best and the world's crushing me or whatever, or blaming other people way, but I'm going to do the best I can and not worry about the results so much. Learn from the results if I do fail, but to know at the end of the day that I did my best and that I'm still good. So Brené gets this answer from her husband, and she's, it's one of those times where you find the right answer, but you didn't want that answer. You wanted to be like, no, this lady's terrible. She's just a sewer rat. So he ends up going back to her therapist and kind of rumbling through this tough decision, this tough conversation, changing her story from this lady was terrible, I was in the right, to this lady may not have been terrible. She might have, but what can I do? What can I do to help her? What could I have done to make the situation better? And she kind of came across the idea that she needed to set stronger boundaries. She should have either never taken the speaking gig or never roomed with a roommate, because in her position, she has the absolute 100% right to ask for those things. She is a famous speaker, and these are the things she's used to. This is how she speaks and performs best. And so she has the absolute right to say, you know what, I'm not going to be able to have a roommate. If you want me to speak at your convention, I'm going to need my own room. And that it sets your respect higher. And so when you command a certain amount of respect, not in a jerky way, but you set these strong boundaries, and then you're very firm about those boundaries. You do not let people push you around. It allows you to love so much more within those boundaries, because there's no ambiguity about why are they doing this wrong? Are they trying to push my buttons or not? No, you set clear boundaries. They're either inside the boundaries and you can love them wholeheartedly, or they're outside the boundaries and you have to either cut them off or do whatever you're going to do to maintain those boundaries. And so this story of Brené feeling these emotions, talking to her therapist, asking people about them, exploring these emotions, and then talking and working through them. And at this point in the story, she didn't actually write it down. She hadn't come up with the write it down part yet of the rumble. what she actually calls a shitty first draft, but she worked it out, in her mind and talking to people. And in the end, she ended up learning a lot about herself, about how she needs to set boundaries, and what turned out to be a really important lesson for her. And the book's kind of set up this way. You have the 1, 2, 3 steps of rising strong, the investigate your emotions, write what you're feeling, and then figure out what's really going on. And then it's kind of paralleled with these 6 stories. And that was just one story that I felt illustrated it best. I think you should definitely read the book. Pull these, because each story, not only does it explain the rising strong process really well, but it gives these really, really powerful personal learnings that she pulled from the process. So it's a bit of a complex book, and I was trying to write down key takeaways, and I got 2 full pages of 1-line key takeaways from the book, so I could go on forever. And I'm talking, this is one of the 6 stories, so there's so much powerful information in this story and in this book. I just wanted to go over the main process, that story that illustrated the process well. I'm gonna dive real quick into the key takeaways from the book, the things that I felt were the absolute best of the best, at least for me, and I think for you guys as well. So the first one I thought was awesome is that she tells a story about Pixar and working with some different people at Pixar, and that creativity requires connection and vulnerability. And so when you talk about the most creative people, it requires this human connection with other people, not only to create the ideas, because creative ideas work better in groups, but to be able to present your idea, hey, I was thinking this, you have to trust that person, not to just knock your idea down. So you need this team of creative people who work together on a very human, real level. And then it requires vulnerability, not only when you're presenting the idea to your colleagues, but even so when you're presenting it to yourself, to even go as deep as you can and really, I would love this, these beautiful dreams, beautiful ideas that end up being the movies, the Avengers movies and the Toy Stories and all these great things that these creatives have made. It requires you to really go deep within yourself and be vulnerable with yourself. And then lastly, and most resonating with me, when you actually put that product out there, you're presenting your baby to the world, and people might destroy it. Every movie, every book gets these terrible reviews. Imagine the vulnerability it takes as that person to put that information out there. This one resonated with me because I'm actually writing a book right now during quarantine as well, and to put the stuff in the book that I think will really help people, the stuff that's really helped me, it's very me, it's very deep, and it requires me to be very vulnerable. Sometimes it's difficult for me just to write this stuff because I'm like, oh man, other people are going to see this, other people are going to read this. And part of it's like, my dog in the background, part of it is like, people are going to read this, this is kind of deep stuff. And then the other part is like, this guy's 21, who the hell does he think he is writing a book about being successful? She talks about this Theodore Roosevelt quote a lot, and it's one that I've always liked, has always resonated with me. And to be the man in the arena, you have to risk vulnerability. And also to be able to get up, those connections, those human connections that you've created. If it was you in a team and your idea gets knocked down together, it's like, man, that sucks. But we did it together. This is ours together. We're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep trying. We're gonna learn from this, and we're gonna do better. Then the second really cool, interesting key takeaway that came from one of the stories, not necessarily the 3 steps of the Rising Strong, but one of the things that she learned was that growth requires loss, and that change and growth, and as you go up, you're growing, you're learning, you're becoming better, you're becoming stronger. That delta, that whatever's at the beginning is lost. There's always a loss, and it's always accompanied by grief. And that, when you go off to college, you lose your parents, you lose those relationships in the way they were, but it must be done. And so she talks about, not only will you feel that grief, but that grief in a way it's good, because it's like the soreness that comes with working out. So as you get better, you feel the grief. You might have achieved something wonderful, but now you always lose something when you gain. And that was really interesting to me because, for example, there's a lot of relationships that I had in high school, or relationships that I've had so far in college, where they were close friends, and for whatever reason, we're both growing in our lives, and we've kind of drifted apart. And so basically this one resonated with me because it's nice to be able to just dive into that grief and understand this is normal. Okay, I can feel this, but it's also, there's a joy that comes with it. We're growing, we're becoming better, and things get left behind, and things do change. And then the last one, which you talked about with the boundaries, I really liked that, because basically you create, these are my rules, this is my integrity, and it requires courage to say that this is what you can and cannot do around me, this is what you can and cannot say around me. And if you push those boundaries, if you do that, there will be some kind of consequences. And this reminded me of Jordan Peterson, but he talks about the monster, and that if you want to be respected and you don't want people to take advantage of you, you set these rules, you have these boundaries. When someone pushes those rules and pushes those boundaries and breaks those rules, you have to be a monster. And I think that this quote can be misconstrued a lot, because people are like, oh no, that's terrible, no, you should never. And he's not talking about coming to physical blows, but you do have to, whether it's cutting someone out of your life or whatever you choose to do, if you want to maintain your self-respect, maintain the respect of other people, and be able to love wholeheartedly and care wholeheartedly about people, you have to maintain a core set of boundaries and rules that people can't cross. You can't be a doormat. And this also reminds me of an idea from a Simon Sinek book, I believe it was, where he talked about they studied a bunch of people throughout their lives, and they kind of looked at who were the most successful people in terms of the way they thought about helping others. So they kind of broke them into 3 categories. There were the selfish people who never helped other people out. There were the expectant givers, where you gave, but you always expected something in return. So it was always, I give, I take. I help you out, I expect help in return. And then there was a third group who just gave completely freely. And that group was the most successful, because people could tell that it came with no strings attached, and you can kind of get that idea that someone who's willing to sacrifice for others is going to be the most successful. But when they looked at that group, they actually found that they could further divide that group into people who gave to anyone and people who would give with no expectation of anything in return, but they would only do it for certain people, for the people who were actually also givers. And so it was almost like they wouldn't let people walk all over them. They wouldn't help someone out. If that person just takes it for granted, then they would stop helping that person out. They would continue to help the people who were, grateful and who they knew would help them out if the situation was reversed. And so the connection between those 3, between the Jordan Peterson idea of being a monster and between the idea of giving freely, but only to people who respect you, it really ties in with this Brené Brown idea of creating these boundaries and being very firm with those boundaries. And that allows you to be so much better and more empathetic, compassionate of a person within those boundaries. And you now have complete certainty when people are breaking your boundaries that they are doing it because they either don't care about you or to hurt you or whatever, and you can then make a decision on what to do about that. Rising Strong is definitely a very powerful book. That's how I would describe it. So as far as the rating goes, the messages and the information that's portrayed in the book, and it would be a solid 9 out of 10. But then I would have to say that as far as actually reading through the book, the amount of people that might pick it up and get a little ways in and put it down, just because it's not a dynamic story. The stories she tells, they're powerful and they teach a lot, but a lot of times they aren't that interesting. So from a storytelling point of view, I think Brené's a great storyteller, but these just aren't that interesting of stories. So all in all, I would give it about a 7.5. Very good book. You should read it. Anyone should read it. I don't think there's a target demographic really as far as entrepreneurs or anyone who wants to grow emotionally and learn from failure. You should check out this book. Rising Strong, the process is powerful, the stories are powerful, and the learning that accompanies it is very powerful. If you are able to get through the emotions that come with reading the book, because that was the thing for me, that I could feel my own emotions every time when I felt sad or felt whatever throughout the book, just because it was very powerful. So all in all, 7.5 out of 10, very good book. Definitely go check it out. knowledge is power. Reading is knowledge. So reading is power. Thank you so much for watching the video and spending a little bit of time with me. If you feel like you enjoyed it, like, comment, subscribe, and I will be back within the next week with another video. Have a great day.